Alright guys, here we go. It is that time of the year again. I am here to predict the upcoming championship season. What could possibly go wrong? With the championship set to kick off next week, I thought now would be an appropriate time to do my predictions for the upcoming season. Now before we do jump into anything, a few things have to be stressed. One, the transfer window is still open and that could massively dictate how the league ends up finishing. And as that's the case, I may do a bit of an updated version of this after the transfer window has gone ahead and closed. I always like sticking my neck out on the line, as we all do at this point of the season, and trying to predict the league as unpredictable as the championship. I want to hear from you guys in the comments down below as well. What's your 1 to 24? Do drop it down there. Drop a like if you go on to enjoy, but without any further ado, let's jump in. Now, I never enjoy putting aside bottom of the championship, but in my 1 to 24, I have gone for Oxford United. A couple of reasons behind this one. Now, the last time a team was promoted from League One to the championship with just 77 points, you're going back almost 8 years. So it stands to reason that Oxford are working from a lower base in terms of squad quality than the vast majority of other sides we've seen promoted from League One in recent years. But that's certainly not to suggest that there's not adequate quality in this Oxford squad. I do think they've got their strengths. I really like their midfield options. I think they will score a fair few goals in the Championship this season as well and probably catch a few sides out. And they've also been pretty busy in recruitment as well. They've already signed 9 players during this window so far, with I'm sure plenty more to follow. What they're doing is I think they're putting together a really strong squad that even if they are relegated, they'll be in a really good position to immediately bounce straight back up from League One. However, plenty of additions can be a little bit of a double-edged sword. Obviously, that will take time to mesh and gel all of these players together, and if Oxford do get off to a little bit of a slow start this season, end up playing catch-up while they bed all these new players in, you leave yourself in a tricky situation. I said before that I can see them scoring a fair few goals this season, but on the flip side of that, I can also see them conceding a few as well. It does have to be said that in League One last season, Oxford did concede considerably more goals than both Portsmouth and Derby, who they've been promoted alongside. And in a league as brutal as the Championship, that could be a bit of a recipe for disaster. Generally speaking, the sides with the worst offensive records tend to go down. But with all that being said, I'm more than willing to be proved wrong on this prediction. I really rate the job that Des Buckingham's done there. Oxford have got the chance to prove me wrong this season. Coming in 23rd place, I've gone for Blackburn Rovers. Now, I actually think as of recording, their squad, as it is right now, may be just about good enough to scrape survival as they did last season, but a couple of external factors from behind the scenes just makes me think that this could be a real uphill battle season for Blackburn. Up until this point, recruitment has been really slow, although we do expect a few deals to filter through in these upcoming days, which should help to bolster that squad a little bit. With that being said, departures are also expected. With Sam Gallagher going out, it's expected that Sammy Smodics will leave at some point during this window, and that would be an absolutely monumental blow to this Rovers side. He was directly involved in 51% of the goals they scored in the Championship last season, and replacing that void, given the financial position the club's in, it's going to be really tricky. There's also an impending court case which is hanging over the Venkies as well, further adding to the mess behind the scenes right now. Don't get me wrong, I think that John Eustace is a steady manager at Championship level, but he's by no means a miracle worker. Blackburn only won 4 of their last 25 games last season, which, whichever way you paint it, is relegation form. I know that Eustace was able to get them over the line in the end, obviously grinded out a lot of draws towards the back end of the season, didn't they? But that squad makeup, with a lack of investment, potentially losing their star player, I think could be a bit of a recipe for disaster. I have to be honest, I really struggled with this last relegation spot. In the end, I have settled on Plymouth, but my feelings on this last relegation spot could be changed come the end of the transfer window. But right now, I think this is how I see it. In the first half of last season under Steven Schumacher, I thought that Plymouth were a breath of fresh air in the Championship. Even in the majority of games that they lost, I thought they were really competitive in, obviously create a lot of chances, and especially at home park, they made that ground an absolute fortress in the first sort of 6 months of that season. But in the post-Schumacher era, that's when we started to see a few more of the holes emerging within that Plymouth squad. Away form was a massive issue issue for them in the entirety of last season, and even towards the back end of that campaign, the home form had started to dry up as well, which really sucked them into the relegation battle. They have been fairly proactive during this window so far, to be fair, looking across to the European market like they did in the previous summer as well. And the good news right now is that as of recording, Morgan Whittaker is still a Plymouth Argyle player, and what a difference that could make next season, having someone who's capable of hitting 20 goals. But I think the big question mark a lot of people have with Plymouth this season, and probably validly so, is over Wayne Rooney. We saw sort of both sides of Plymouth last season and how much the right or wrong manager can influence things at home park. The drop off in form from Schumacher to Foster was absolutely mind-blowing. Now, I do think that Wayne Rooney probably gets a little bit of a harsh rap sometimes because of how the Birmingham stint went, and this probably is his last chance to prove himself as a manager at championship level before, he'd be forced to take a job way further down the footballing ladder if this Plymouth job goes wrong. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The plus sides for Rooney here is that he's had a full pre-season to work with this Plymouth squad, a luxury that he wasn't previously afforded at Birmingham. But I just think there's a bit of a potential this season for Plymouth to go on a little bit of a rut, a little bit of a winless run, and I'm not sure if Rooney, if things do start to turn and go badly, has yet proven himself to be adaptable enough to properly switch things up. Once again, happy to be proven wrong on that prediction, but I think a lot of people, still have that question mark over Plymouth. Forming in 21st place and just surviving by the skin of their teeth right now, I'm going for Derby County. Now, it's a tough prediction to make because this is sort of based on the players I think Derby will sign between now and the end of the transfer window. I still think there's areas of that squad that need patching up and aren't probably up to championship standard right now. I also think there's a bit of a question mark over Paul Warne as well, and I'm not totally convinced that he'll still be the Derby manager come the end of the season. But with all that being said, I think Derby are an ambitious club and have a certain pull in the championship where they will be able to attract some pretty high caliber players who they have been linked to of late, looking specifically in the goalkeeping department, Karamoko Dembele, who's been linked with them quite heavily as well. I don't necessarily think that this season's going to be pretty for Derby. I just think they'll find a way to get over the line come the end of the campaign, but that final relegation spot, I really have gone back and forth between Derby and Plymouth. More additions are needed within that Derby squad between now and the end of the window to fully convince me they have the minerals to survive this season. I've just got a feeling that they do pull a few of those deals off and eventually find a way to get over that dotted line. Coming in 20th place, I've gone for Watford, another side who I do think are candidates for relegation this season. Thinking back to last year, they were solid enough in the first half of the campaign, but from sort of Christmas onwards, were a little bit of a train wreck, weren't they? Cleverly came in the final few weeks of the season and sort of steadied the ship a little bit. There were quite a few draws towards the back end of the campaign, but from January onwards, Watford only won 4 games of football last season. They only finished 6 points above the relegation zone, and I don't think there's any arguments to be made that they're undoubtedly coming into this season weaker than they were 12 months ago. Kone has already left. I think there's more departures to follow as well. Wesley Hote's been strongly linked with a move away. Asprilla as well. Not sure where I see the consistent flow of goals coming from within that Watford squad right now, which I think could be a real issue for them next season if it's not adequately addressed in the final few weeks of the window. But with all that being said, I think there is just about enough quality that should maintain their status as a championship club. If things do go close to the wire, I'm not sure how long Tom Cleverley will be given in that role. Despite his promise and potential as a football manager, if Watford are cutting it close to that relegation zone, I don't think that board will have any hesitation in making a change there. Things could change in the final few weeks of the window, but as of right now, I'm not massively hot on Watford. Forming in 19th place, I've then gone for John Messinio's Portsmouth, and really excited to have Pompey back in the Championship. I do think there's quite a bit of potential with this Portsmouth squad. I think they've been quite clever and concise with their business so far. There's not been wholesale changes, which I think is a good thing, to be honest. I particularly like the additions of Jordan Williams from Barnsley and obviously Josh Murphy, who they picked up from Oxford United on the free transfer. They were the best side in League One last season, and I do think they've got the most potential of the three sides coming up to immediately adapt to the Championship. They only lost 5 games of football in League One last season, and having that sort of momentum behind you, the wind in your sails, that can really spur you on for the following campaign, as I suppose we saw with Ipswich last season. For Portsmouth's sake, I think this season is all about stability, establishing yourself as a Championship club before you then go and kick on. But I think they've got a really good chance of doing that this year. Coming in 18th place, I've gone for Stoke City. Always a tough club to judge. I always feel like there's a bit of promise with Stoke at the start of every campaign, but how the season then goes on and unfolds always sort of drags us back down to reality. Looking at their historical league finishes in the last 4 Championship seasons, they finished 14th, 14th, 16th and 17th. So season upon season, we're seeing a slow regression from Stoke here, last year definitely being the worst. Well, let's face it, relegation was a real possibility for Stoke last season, had it not been for that change of fortune in the final few weeks of the season where they managed to win their final 3 matches. There was one point of last season where they were really staring down the barrel, and relegation to League One was a proper possibility for that squad. They have added and patched up the squad in a few areas since that point. I think we expect more transfer activity from Stoke between now and the end of the window as well. Some of my issues with that squad still remain this season. Having a consistent goal scorer was an issue for them last season. Vidigal was their top scorer, who ended the campaign on 6 goals. They were quite fortunate whereby the goals were fairly well shared out throughout the rest of the squad, but scoring 49 goals, just over 1 goal per game, wasn't a great return for Stoke, especially with their defensive record last season. The good news is Badger and Ho and Wouterberger are still Stoke City players. I've got a gut feeling that at least one of them leaves between now and the end of the window though. I just think, as has been proven year after year, they're just a bit of a patchy team, where they are capable of stringing together a decent winning run, but equally, they're also capable of dropping like a stone and losing 5 or 6 games in a row. Home form was a real issue for Stoke last season. They managed to turn it around under Schumacher towards the end of the campaign, but whether or not they can do that over a full season, we'll have to wait and see. Don't get me wrong, there is potential for the Potters to kick on this season, but as always seems to be the case, they'll just find some way to shoot themselves in the foot. Coming in 17th place, I've gone for Swansea City. It's a drop of 3 league positions compared to their finish in the Championship last season. Couple of reasons behind this one, but honestly, I found this portion of the table really hard to differentiate a lot of the clubs. I think, as is often the case in mid-table in the Championship, there'll likely only be a few points to separate Swansea, who I've got in 17th, with the club I've got in 13th, for example. Tough to make these predictions right now, but I do think there's an argument that that squad is probably weaker at this stage than it was last season. I think there's potentially a lack of match-winning players within that Swansea setup right now. Last season, for example, Jamal Lowe and Jerry Yates were the club's top scorers in the Championship with 9 goals and 8 goals each. And obviously neither of them are at the club right now. Williams will want the goals to be fairly well shared out, I'm sure, between all of his squad. Jisung Eom and Goncalo Franco I'm excited to see more of. I think there is a potential question mark over Lawrence Vigouroux, who they brought in as their new #1 goalkeeper, given he's not played any first team football in over a year now. Obviously he's coming in to replace the popular Carl Rushworth, who I thought was really good on loan with Swansea last season. Listen, there's still time for Swansea to improve between now and the end of the window. I think Josh Ginnelly returning will be a real boost for them, but I wouldn't be totally surprised if there is a bit of a regression from the Swans this time around, but maybe I'm just being a bit too harsh. Coming in 16th place, I've gone for Millwall. Bit of a tricky side to call this season. Last time around, Millwall were a little bit all over the place. Started the season with Gary Rowett, tried to go in a new direction under Joe Edwards, but that didn't go to plan whatsoever, and then Neil Harris came in and got a real tune out of that squad towards the back end of last season. Whether or not that's what we can expect from Millwall over the entirety of next season, I'm not so sure. One thing I would say about Millwall is I think that squad that Rowett had previously that was sort of knocking on the door for the top 6 has very much come towards the end of its cycle. A lot of those players have already moved on, and then some of the older heads in that Millwall squad right now are slowly being phased out of the side, and it does feel like a gradual sort of rebuild is taking place at the Den. I think that Neil Harris is a safe pair of hands to oversee that for the time being, but whether he's the right long long-term man for Millwall. I suppose this season we'll have to wait and see. The addition of Macaulay Langstaff I think is really exciting, but whether or not he'll get the adequate service that he's previously been used to hit such lofty figures, we'll have to wait and see. I think there's also something to be said about Zian Fleming maybe. Hopefully he's able to re-find his spark a little bit. Definitely had moments of quality last season, but not maybe to quite the same degree that he was firing in his debut season per se. I reckon they'll be solid enough and a real tough nut to crack under Harris though, where I reckon they'll be solid mid-table. Coming in 15th place, I've gone for Cardiff City. Reckon this will be another solid mid-table year for Errol Bullock's side. Obviously they made huge strides forward last season and under quite difficult circumstances as well. You know, they were working with a transfer embargo last season. Not much was really thought of them coming into that campaign, but still managed to finish 12th. I've got a feeling they'll be there or thereabouts in the table once again. Just a couple of red flags that make me think maybe there could be a slight regression. The underlying numbers weren't brilliant for Cardiff last season and they weren't always great to watch on the eye either. In fact, they were the third worst side in the Championship last season for chance creation. But in saying all of that, I think Bullock's proven himself to be a decent manager at this level. Even when things got tough for them last season, showed a bit of adaptability and the ability to come out of that on the other side as well, which is impressive. I think they've had a pretty solid transfer window so far as well. Chris Willock I think is a nice addition who will hopefully help with that creativity problem they had at times last year, especially if they get him fully fit and confident. Wilfred Kanga will hopefully chip in with a few more goals for them, and I really like the addition of Callum Chambers as well, especially on a free transfer. Going from 1 to 11 through that Cardiff squad, I just think it's a really solid Championship outfit that's maybe just lacking that little bit of star power to properly propel them into top 6 territory perhaps. I reckon it'll be a solid season for them nonetheless. Coming in 14th place, I've gone for Queen's Park Rangers. I think we'll see a nice steady improvement from QPR coming into this season. Finished 18th in the Championship last season, but I definitely think there's a lot of room for optimism at Loftus Road coming into this new campaign. From October onwards last season, they were performing like a mid-table Championship club under Cifuentes, and I see no reason why that should change coming into this new campaign. They've been fairly proactive in the transfer market so far, have really looked towards Europe in terms of their incomings. Still think there's a little bit of a question mark over creativity in that side and maybe a bit of an over-reliance on Chair, especially with Willock leaving. But I really rate Cifuentes. I back him to get a tune out of that squad, and the recruitment in this transfer window so far seems to be a little bit more focused compared to maybe in previous years where it was a little bit more of a sort of scattergun approach or whatever. My only two reservations with QPR is one, that issue of creativity perhaps, especially if Chair picks up an injury, and two, the potential for Cifuentes to be poached by another club at some point of this Championship season. He's a really highly regarded manager who has been linked with a few jobs in the summer. I don't think we can totally discount that notion, especially if he continues to perform with QPR. But all in all, definitely expecting improvements from QPR. Coming in 13th place, I've gone for my club, Preston North End. It is a fall of 3 places from last season, but I reckon we will be there or thereabouts in this sort of region of the table once again. The loss of Alan Brown is a big one. We can't ignore that. He was our player of the season last year. But I'm hopeful that the arrival of Stefan Thordarson will be able to cover that. The way I think a lot of people would sum up Preston is we are incredibly streaky, and I see no reason why that should change coming into this new season. I think this squad under Ryan Lowe, how we play, is equally capable of going on a 6-game losing streak compared to going on a 6-game winning streak. We're just that sort of club. Chance creation wasn't great last season, and that was a real issue for fans. I'm hopeful that the addition of Greenwood will add to that a little bit. Mads has got a full season of Championship football under his belt. I'm hopeful that he can become a little bit more impactful. Emil Rees being fully fit, as well as having the likes of Osmajic and Will Keane to rely upon for the goals as well. Now, I'm not going to lie, this prediction is based on Preston signing 2 capable wing-backs between now and the end of the transfer window. I don't think we can afford to have Robbie Brady and Brad Potts as our only options on either flank, really, for the whole campaign. I think we'll be found out that way. But the club has been quite open in the press in saying that those are priority positions that we are looking to strengthen. So going off that, I think there's hopefully a chance that we get to see a bit more out of this Ryan Lowe system with competent wing-backs on either side. Fingers crossed. With that being said, I do think there is a strong possibility that Preston end the season without Ryan Lowe as manager. I think considering how we ended last season, if we start this new campaign on a bad front will be immediately under pressure. But I think the general quality in that squad will be good enough to see us to around about 13th in the table. Coming in 12th place, I've gone for Sheffield Wednesday. I do think there's real reason for optimism at Hillsborough right now. The way they ended last season, the fact that Danny Roll is committed to a long-term project at Sheffield Wednesday as well. Everything seems to be moving in the right direction, which is a total contrast to the way we were discussing Wednesday just 12 months ago. They've been one of the most proactive clubs in the transfer market up until this point, and more additions are expected between now and the end of the window. I still think there are a few gaps in that squad, certainly in terms of a natural goal scorer. Still think they could do with another option or two in midfield as well to boost up their options in that position. Generally speaking, the overall quality of that squad has improved over the summer. Tactically, I think Roll was probably one of the best managers in the Championship last season. I do always think that there's potential at Sheffield Wednesday for a little bit of chaos throughout the season for one reason or another. You know, with Chansiri, you tend to get that every now and again. But everyone at the club right now seems to be pushing in the right direction, and there's no reason why they can't massively improve on last season's finish. I reckon the 12th place finish would represent a really good season for Wednesday and a clear sign of progress. Coming in 11th place, I've gone for Hull City. Now, this is a prediction which I've been going back and forth with in my head all week long, really. Hull are a bit of an impossible one to call right now, in my opinion. As their squad currently looks, I probably wouldn't predict them for a top half finish. I think there's quite a few gaps in there right now which definitely need to be plugged up. But in the back of my mind, I'm sort of thinking about how Hull caught me out in these predictions last season. Hull ended up doing the majority of their business later on in the transfer window, and I've got a feeling they're going to do the same this time around. Obviously, they've got the Jacob Greaves and Jaden Philogene money to play around with. Two massive losses, by the way, and a key reason why I think they probably will fall off a little bit. But Hull, under this ownership so far, have proven themselves to be really ambitious. I'd imagine they'll roll the dice and try and be quite ambitious once again in the loan market as they were last season. Obviously a question mark over Tim Walter and his abilities in the Championship as well, which will be tested throughout the campaign. What will potentially hold Hull back is obviously it's a new style of play they want to adopt. More forward thinking and attacking compared to what Rossini was serving up last season. But the fact I can see them signing quite a few players in the final weeks of the transfer window just makes me think that they may get off to a bit of a slow start to the season and gradually grow into it as it goes on. But we said about Hull last season, they're a bit of a wild card this year. I'm really not sure where they'll land. Coming in 10th place, I've gone for Bristol City. I think generally speaking, there's pretty positive vibes around Ashton Gate right now, and I think for valid reasons as well. In each of the last 4 Championship campaigns, Bristol City have improved upon their previous league finish. They've gone from finishing 19th to 17th to 14th to last season 11th, and I reckon this upcoming season could be another year of steady progress for the Robins. I like the look of their transfer activity so far. Scoring goals consistently was a bit of an issue for them last season, but they've added the likes of Sinclair Armstrong, Fali Mayulu and Yuri Hirakawa as well. They were also pretty decent defensively last year as well. Only West Brom, Leeds and Leicester conceded less goals than Bristol City did, which is a real feather in their cap. I think Liam Manning is a manager that I like as well, albeit maybe there's just a smidge of inconsistency that just makes me think that that Bristol City squad will slightly lag behind the sides properly in the hunt for the top 6. But I see no reason why they can't be there or thereabouts. Coming in 9th place, I've gone for Sunderland. Now, the Black Cats were a side who I was struggling to place a little bit, and I'm still conflicted really on where I think they will finish. This prediction of them finishing in 9th is based on the logic that they'll continue to add between now and the end of the window, because I definitely still think there are a couple of areas that they need to address, a prolific goal scorer and proper number 9 being one of them. With that being said, I do think we will see an improved Sunderland side compared to what Sunderland fans were served up last season, which, let's face it, the last 4 months of that campaign were a total write-off. Up until Tony Mowbray was dismissed last season, he did have them up and around the playoff picture, but everything from Mick Beale taking over was a total disaster at the Stadium of Light. Big positive for Sunderland is that Jack Clarke is still their player, and I look at the rest of that squad and I see so much potential there. It's obviously a very youthful core. While the transfer activity so far has been slow and steady, I like the additions they've made up until this point. Alan Brown from my team Preston I think is a really solid and sensible addition into that midfield. Ian Pervader, a player that I like, and I think there will be more additions to come between now and the end of the window as well. Obviously the new manager, Reg Labrie, an unproven boss at this level, but I'm excited to see more from him. I reckon a finish of 9th is realistic for Sunderland on the logic that they add at least one goal scoring forward. Coming in 8th place, I've gone for Norwich City, a slight regression from last season. I do think that the Canaries will be there or thereabouts in the playoff picture, and anyone from this point upwards I do think is a realistic candidate for the top 6, and I've shuffled this about a few times if I'm being honest. And come the end of the transfer window, my opinions on Norwich could have shifted a little bit. The great news for Norwich fans is that their 3 big hitters are all still on the books. Gabriel Sara, Johnny Rowe and Josh Sargent are all still Norwich City players. Whether they all will be come the end of the transfer window, I'm not so sure, but that's a real positive. But my concern with Norwich isn't really relating to their goal-scoring prowess, it's more so at the opposite end of the pitch. Last season, Norwich conceded more goals than any of the other sides who finished in the top 6. In fact, they only conceded 1 fewer goal than Birmingham did last season, who ended up being relegated. Jose Cordoba is the big signing of the transfer window so far for Norwich, and it's hoped that he will help ease some of those defensive problems from last season. But that, along with potentially losing one of their big players between now and the end of the transfer window, is my only sort of flag for thinking maybe they might just miss out, but it's tough to say before the end of the window. Coming in 7th place and just missing out on the top 6, I have gone for West Brom. They were an ever-present side in the Championship top 6 last season, made it to the playoff semi-finals and were a really solid outfit under Carlos Corberán. Home form at the Hawthorns was absolutely fantastic throughout that campaign, and I reckon they are a realistic outfit for the top 6 once again. Just a couple of factors make me think that maybe a few sides could leapfrog them and maybe they'll just miss out this season. Financially, I think it's been quite well documented that the club has been tiptoeing around financial fair play, obviously with the parachute payments running out. Quite a few of their first team players now in the final year of their contract at West Brom. Several of them have been linked with moves away from the club, and whether West Brom can adequately replace those outgoing stars with adequate quality that will immediately see them challenging for the top 6 again, we'll have to wait and see. They might have to get creative in the final few weeks of this transfer window. In saying that, I think Carlos Corberán is one of the best managers in the Championship, and he gives West Brom a really good chance of promotion once again, as long as he's not poached away at some point of the season. If you yourselves have West Brom predicted to finish in the top 6, I wouldn't have any complaints over that. I reckon if the squad just dips in quality though, with a few departures that we're expecting, they could just come up short this year maybe. Coming in 6th place, and as my first playoff entry, we are having Sheffield United. Now, I think a lot of people's perspectives on Sheffield United has flipped quite a bit in the last few weeks, where they've been really active in the transfer market. Obviously, this takeover still ongoing. Even with that rumbling in the background, they've still been quite proactive in this window and have got some really juicy deals over the line so far. With the arrivals of the likes of Sam McCallum, Jamie Shackleton, Callum O'Hare, Kiefer Moore and Harrison Burrows, along with the stars who have stuck around from last season, this squad really is starting to take shape now. Now, it is worth saying that they are working with a point deduction, albeit a 2-point deduction, which I don't think will harm their chances of promotion that much. But this right here is, dare I say it, a bit of a now or never season for Chris Wilder. I think that the last few jobs he's had, his stock has taken quite a hit in recent years, I think it's fair to say. This is Wilder's moment to prove that he's still got it in him to oversee this rebuild of Sheffield United and turn them into promotion challengers once again. I think that with how many players are coming in, how many players are expected to come in still between now and the end of the window, there is potential for them to be quite a slow starter this season. But with the quality of players there, the quality of players that could still come in, there's real potential. I definitely think the overall mood and vibe around around Bramall Lane is a lot more positive now than it was a few weeks ago. I reckon they'll just about sneak into the top 6. Coming in 5th place and also finishing in the playoffs, I'm going to go for Middlesbrough. Now, I was tipping Michael Carrick's side for a top 6 finish last season. It didn't end up happening, but I'm doubling down with my Borough shout. I do think they'll be in the top 6 this season. Now, last year was a little bit all over the place for Middlesbrough. I think everyone would agree with that. They had that crippling injury crisis in the middle portion of the season from sort of October to February, where they were working with a really diminished squad and their league form really dipped off during that time. But what we saw in the back end of last season I thought was really quite promising. They only lost one of their last 12 football matches, and as we've seen countless times under Carrick, this squad is capable of going on prolonged winning streaks, and when you're looking to get up and around the top 6, that can be so valuable. I look at the business they've done so far this summer as well. I also think it looks quite promising. I like the addition of Aidan Morris, who comes in and complements what was already a decent looking strong midfield. I think he'll add another dynamic to that. Delano Bogzog's a bit of a wild card option. Thought he looked good in flashes last season for Huddersfield, to be fair, so I'm looking forward to seeing a little bit more of him in a more attack-minded system. Emmanuel Latte-Lath really came into his own towards the back end of last season. I think he's in with a shout of being the top scorer in the league this season if Borough keep him fully fit. Don't get me wrong, I'm still expecting a bit more business between now and the end of the transfer window, but looking at that squad from front to back, I think there's no reason to suggest why Borough can't be mixing it with these sides in and around the top of the Championship. Their underlying numbers were really strong last season. Providing that there's no crippling injury crisis at some point of this campaign, I reckon they'll get over the line and into the top 6 this time. Coming in 4th place, I'm going for Coventry City, another club with absolutely huge potential right now. I also think I backed Coventry for the playoffs last season as well. Didn't quite happen for them in the end, but like my Middlesbrough shout, I'm doubling down on Coventry right now. I think Coventry have done really well to rebuild their squad over the last sort of 18 months. They've really come away from that side now that was sort of dominated. The star players were Gyökeres and Hamer. They've got this new core of players now who are definitely capable of mixing it in the top end of the Championship. Last season was a little bit hit and miss for them. It was a slow start and slow finish to the season for Coventry, but from sort of November to February last year, they were as good as any side in the Championship in terms of the results they were consistently picking up in that specific time period. I think Mark Robins is one of the best managers in the league. I generally really like the look of their business so far this summer as well. I think they've been quite sensible in that. With the additions of Jack Rodoni, Lewis Binks, Oliver Dovin. You've also got Mason Clark to come into that side as well, which I'm really excited about. Literally from defence to attack, I really like a number of the options that Coventry have got to work with this season. So barring maybe a key player being sold or an injury crisis or something like that derailing their season, there's no reason why they can't be finishing in the top 6 this year. Coming in 3rd place and just missing out on automatic promotion, I'm going for Luton Town. Last time Rob Edwards' side were in the Championship was obviously their promotion campaign. They finished third that season, picked up 80 points, and I see this squad currently accumulating a similar amount. What I think will be the real task for Edwards this season is how adaptable can he be with this Luton squad? Can he get this team to a stage where they're dominating football matches? If he can do that, that could potentially take them into automatic promotion territory. But I was looking into some of the underlying stats from Luton's promotion season last time around. I found them really interesting. Despite finishing 3rd in the Championship last season, they were only averaging 45% possession and were only taking an average of 12 shots per game, which is sort of typical of a mid-table side. But the overall squad makeup of that squad I think is really strong. I think Edwards has got a strong bond with both the team and fan base right now, who are definitely all behind this project despite the relegation last season. Generally speaking, they've kept hold of the core of that squad as well, albeit they've lost Barkley, who was a big player for them last time around, and I still think they could do with a conductor in the middle to replace that creativity. They've been shopping in the free transfer market for this summer so far, but I'd expect a little bit more business between now and the end of the window. I certainly think they'll be there or thereabouts in the automatic promotion hunt. I just think a couple of sides may beat them to it. Coming in 2nd place and claiming that first automatic promotion spot, I'm going to go with Burnley. I just think looking at the overall makeup of that squad, it would be a bit of a crime if Scott Parker's not getting this Burnley side into the top 2. Now, there is probably a question mark against the Burnley side. I'd be interested to know from Burnley fans themselves, do you think the squad as it is right now is as good as the team that got promoted from the Championship last time, considering obviously Burnley have no longer got the likes of Muric, Howard Bellis, Ian Matson, Teller, who was brilliant for them in that campaign as well. But on the flip side, they did add quite a few promising players during their Premier League campaign who are still with the club today. During this transfer window so far, they've predominantly looked towards the European and South American markets to add players. Scott Parker's a very divisive football manager, and I totally get why. He's got 2 promotions on his CV already from the Championship, but not exactly in emphatic fashion, and he was working with probably the 2 best teams in the Championship in those seasons as well. At least 2 of the most fancied sides in those seasons. But he's got a similar task at Burnley here, and you know what? I think he probably pulls it off, and I think he does go 3 promotions from 3 Championship seasons. I know Parker ball isn't exactly the most enthralling style of play, but I just look at that team on paper and think there's so many goals to be had in there. And generally speaking, Parker tries to get his sides quite well organised defensively, which I imagine Burnley will be. Those things coupled together, along with more star power than the majority of other Championship clubs, and I think they get automatic promotion. But coming in and winning the Championship, in my opinion, I'm going for Leeds United. Last season was absolutely mental around the automatic promotion chase, and I actually think there's a very good chance that if Leeds emulate last season to a T, they pick up 90 points. I think there's a very good chance that they end up winning the Championship this season. I don't think the threshold for winning the league or automatic promotion will be anywhere near as high as it was last season, where we really had 4 outstanding teams in the Championship, all battling for those 2 places. Leeds have lost the likes of Archie Gray and Glenn Kamara so far, and I would expect at least one of Rutter, Somerville or Nonto to depart between now and the end of the window. But even if that's the case, I still think Leeds have got a squad more than capable of winning the Championship. Farke's a manager who's picked up 90 or more points on 3 separate occasions now. I know he had his critics, especially towards the back end of last season, and being a little bit tactically inflexible at times definitely cost Leeds some points. But they were the 2nd best defensive unit in the Championship last season. They've added Joe Rodon on a permanent basis, which I think is really positive. Jaden Bogle's come in, which I think is a nice addition as well. Joe Rothwell in on loan gives them another dynamic in midfield, maybe a few more goals from that midfield area, which was perhaps lacking from last season. Leeds never like to do things the easy way, and it would be typical if they were to finish 3rd in the Championship again and say miss out on the final day of the season or something like that. But all of my logic, looking at that squad on paper, thinking of what Farke is capable of, I reckon they win the league this season. I really do. But guys, there you have it. That will now wrap it up for today's video. As you can see on screen now, there are my Championship 1 to 24 predictions for this upcoming season. Do you agree with them? Let me know down below. Other than that though guys, that will now wrap it up for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. If you did go on to enjoy, make sure to drop a like, and I'll see you all in the next one.